Hey, you want to go for a ride?
No, thanks.
No thanks. What does that mean?
Don't want to go.
Go where?
For a ride.
A ride. Now that's a good idea. Okay, let's go.
Funny.
Talented.
Charismatic.
Very ambitious.
Hypnotizing. Remembering Caspar Pound. A feature by Roger van Lunteren.
Passionate.
Enigmatic.
Open-minded.
Crafty.
Good-hearted.
Sharp as in very sharp.
A cool dude.
I think he wanted to make an impact.
He was a hustler.
He's just a bloody genius.
Very bright.
I don't think I'd be who I am today.
He drew people to him.
He was an enigmatic studio genius.
He was a landmark in my set.
You play on a dance floor and it works, then that's all you need to know.
Strange guy, very, very complex character.
Very capable.
Faceless, techno, bollocks.
Let it go. Let it go. Because that's the only way I know that you'll find rainbows, rainbows, rainbows in the sky.
In the early years of techno, a young lad called Caspar Pound laid the foundation for an inherent part of modern dance culture. Spawning labels, enabling careers, and curating an infinite stream of innovative music, he stayed active on the scene right until his untimely passing in 2004 at the age of only 33. In this year, 2020, Caspar would have reached the magic age of 50. With this special feature, we will honor and celebrate his art and legacy by revisiting his early work together with personal insights and memories from some of Caspar's earliest and closest companions, longtime collaborators, production partners and contemporaries. Electronic music had a long history before it all took a strong new turn in the year 1990. It felt like all trends and genres melded together to become this one big love. Soul, disco and early electro beats, the rhythmic flow of rap and hip-hop, the melancholy of new wave and the post-punk era of the 80s, and even the attitude of punk itself. In hindsight, it looks like a natural and inevitable development that, after acid and house music had justifiably dominated most of the late 80s, the sound fusioned with the cold and often harsh sonics and sawtooth synth lines of the preceding 2 decades of industrial music and noises. This all led to the revolutionary techno movements which defined the second half of the golden era of modern electronic dance music from 1988 to 1992. Starting in 1990, the techno movement united the scenes all around the world. They all shared the music, the love for the music, and the love for the love. The sound contained many familiar elements, but the time and composition led to new and powerful tracks, and every day was packed with exciting new releases. Even though the tracks sounded quite dissimilar in those days, the mindset of all scenes was the same. Peace, love, and dance, a universal language. Wherever the spirit happened, it was dark, deep, and foggy. Stumbling through the strobo flashlights, longing for that sonic rainbow in the night sky. Somewhere in your hood or in the neighboring towns, some people had set up an illegal event. Mostly the locations were hard to find and sometimes impossible to get to, if the secret event was not secretly cancelled without any notice at all. No place was safe or worse enough to deliver the perfect backdrop for the illegal dance occasion. That is, if you found it. In a warehouse, in a tunnel, in abandoned factories or in dried up riverbeds underneath bridges. In those days, underground dance music was filled with striking hooks when almost every track instantly became an eternal classic, defining the genre while expanding its boundaries at the same time. When you went dancing in 1990, underground dance floors usually sounded like this. Looking back at these tracks today, 30 years later, the top hits of that time are still the defining blueprints for techno even today. Many of the legendary pioneering artists from the 1990s techno heyday are still active, doing their thing, evolving. Others unfortunately never even got the chance to get so far. One of those innovating pioneers was Caspar Pound, the hippie next to the Homeboy and the Funki Dredd, and one half of the infamous Hypnotist. He founded the labels Rising High and its sub-labels Sappho and Ascension, and kept exploring new territory with every step he made. With his solo projects and many production and writing partners, he wrote enormously unique and groundbreaking tracks that shook dance floors all around the world. When entering an event, the chances were not too odd that you were being welcomed and at the same time blown away by this.
Total confusion!
Born in 1970, Caspar originally hailed from Peterborough, a 2-hour drive north of London. He got involved with music by buying many records all the time and did the first hip-hop show on a local radio station in 1987. He also DJ'd and ran a club together with some fellows who would later form UK dance act Shades of Rhythm. During the second summer of love, when acid and house music took the UK by storm in 1988, Caspar could not resist the magical attraction of London, home to the legendary nightclubs like Shoom and Future. Caspar was driven and drawn and settled there right away to delve into the hustle and bustle of the big city, while the new sounds kept expanding to continental Europe. He moved through the scene for some time and knew that he had something to contribute and that he was able and determined to do so. First of all, he managed to get some studio time, but it was apparent that he needed support. Then he received a tip that he should go and see a certain Marc Williams who lived in the area. Hence one morning, in 1990, somewhere in London.
I was lying on the floor. The door knocks on my bedroom. He just came in. This guy's lanky. He's tall, like 6 foot, God knows what. And I'm really short. So I'm lying there and this massive guy with huge shaggy hair that I'd never seen, just popped in and said, "Hey, you're Marc, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yes." "You make music?" "Yes." "I need someone to come to the studio and write a tune with me, write some music with me." "Well, I'm your man." And we just did it. I got up, we had a chat. He said, "Meet me around here." I met him. We went to the studio, and that's how I met Caspar. He just appeared like an apparition. The studio we worked in was incredible. This studio was way ahead of where we were. It had a Fairlight system. The sound in this room was unbelievable. So when it came to Total Confusion, we were playing on equipment that I just had never used before. The arrangement for Total Confusion is one of the strangest arrangements you'll see. It goes on for ages. You've got that countdown, then the rap comes in, and you've got the stabs at the end with the toe, and the end. He had so many ideas.
Total confusion! Total confusion! Total confusion!
Radio stations are questioning their blackness. They call us a black, but we'll see if they'll play this.
remember when we went in to do Total Confusion, it was the day after me tripping. I had taken some, 1990s experimental things. And yeah, I remember we sampled the guitar stab from a group called Original Concept. The original tune, it went, "This is Total Confusion, not an illusion." This was Caspar's idea, go for that Total Confusion. And then take that guitar stab and then expand it across the keyboard. And I had to hammer this key. He said, just play it as hard as you can. I don't care. And in my head, I had Cübik from 808 State playing in my head. And I'm tripping or coming down off it. And the spaces between the keys looked larger to me than the keys. So I kept feeling like I was missing them. So it made me want to play them harder. Oh, I was all over the place. And he's saying, play them harder, man. And of course, he's got this massive frizzy head of hair bouncing up and down while he's saying, play it harder. And I'm spanking these melting keys.
I got plenty of that, plus the fact that I ain't whack yet. You come over here, you know that you're gonna get slapped back to where you come from. Could be the front or London, I'll take you all on. Cause the truth to mess and just with the roughest. Manchester in the house is something to blow your mind into the atmosphere. Come on, feel the bass cause London's here.
He's saying play it harder, and I'm just So towards the end, when the stabs go really crazy, that's when he was really on. And I'm spanking, and he's going harder, I'm going harder. It's just, and he knew what he wanted to get out of me. My hang-ups after, thinking like, why didn't I get more? But he was being a producer and getting it out of me. It wouldn't have happened without squeezing that juice. So yeah, fair play.
Through your bloodstream, and when you feel the vibe, you know what I mean. By a place that's kicking from the heart, and it's my time to get started on the beats that really matter. This is not your average chick chatter on the microphone. You're all alone.
Putting the delay on the woos. Woo, 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 woo. I put those in. I programmed everything. But Caspar said put a delay on it. So he had these little magical sparkle touches that just added a spiritual energy to what we put down. I was really happy with what I did. Woo, woo, dry. But then when he said woo, 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 it just, he just knew how to do that thing that made you put your hands up. He understood what those kind of lasers were doing to people. And, the mixture of those visuals with that either ambient uplifting or real gritty grounding kind of thing is what made him spectacular.
Radio stations are questioning their blackness, they call us a black, but we'll see if they'll play this.
Almost finished, but Caspar and Marc felt like something was missing.
We needed something. We were flying in that room, and we weren't going to leave there without having something vocal on there. And we're in the studio, we've put together this kind of amazing piece. I didn't know it was amazing, but it obviously was, and it was powerful. We need to get this done now. A limited time in the studio, let's finish this thing. So I said, well, I've got this rap that I've written for someone else. I could always put the rap on there as a placeholder, so we've got something in the space to hold us. And he's like, okay, let's try it. I go in the box, I do this rap, and he's looking at me going, this is really good, we should keep it. And I'm like, hell no. I'm a serious producer. I'm a serious musician. I don't do raps. And he's like, yeah, but it's good, mate. And it never bloody came off.
Hello everyone, the Ovaltinis are back, and happy days are here again.
I turned up at home that morning. It was an all-night session, and knocked on the guy, Tony, who had got me a room. He was like always listening to every tune I'd ever made. I knock on his door, he's in bed, he gets up, I'm like, mate, I think we've done a good tune, you know. He's like, really? I goes, well, you got it. So I put headphones on him and he's lying down and he plays the tune, and within like 30 seconds, he's bolt upright in bed, eyes like alive. And he's like, what the is this? This is crazy. I'm not really sure what's happening. Well, a few days later, Caspar comes around, picks up the phone, goes, hi, yeah, I'm calling from Rising High Records. I'd like to have a meeting, come down, play some tunes, and they're like, yeah, come down. Like, Virgin, EMI. I'm like, looking at this guy, I'm like, how the flip did you just wangle this? I've been sitting in bedrooms playing these dodgy Casio keyboards for God knows how long. I've just walked into Ian Levine's studio straight away, and from there we're going into every record company just from this confident young guy who just knew how to spin it, you know. Me and Caspar go out to these record companies and we get turned down the first day by 3 labels. Every single label, nah. So that night, after being rejected 3 times, me, Caspar, and we take my friend that I'd played the tune to that morning. We go to a famous club called Schallobst. There was a classic night called Confusions, a legendary night. And on the night bus, on the way back home, I say to Tony, why don't you come out with us tomorrow to some of these meetings? Because we had a really good night. We were buzzing on the way back home on the night bus. Me and Caspar are laughing. We're telling Tony these stories about, you know, going around to these record companies and, you know, working. And Tony's really like confident that there's something wrong with these people because he was blown away, and why don't they understand? And Tony's got these funky dread short back and sides, and he's this hunk of a man, you know, built, strong, square chin. There's me, this lily-livered musician, and Caspar, this lanky kind of character. I never really thought of the sight of me and Caspar walking into record companies, what that must have looked like. Who the F are these 2 twats? But Tony was the great equalizer. Tony was the person that gelled this whole thing together, and it really taught me a lesson, because the next day we went out and it was a complete 180. Everybody wanted to sign us, because I realized that a lot of people listen to music with their eyes. When you're looking at Earth, Wind and Fire, when you're looking at Michael Jackson, it's not just the music, it's his dance moves, it's the spectacle of Parliament and a guy coming down in a spaceship with his nappies on that makes you kind of go crazy. The sound is complemented by the vision. So I didn't realize that until we went around, and we just got a deal straight away. Sheila, her name was at Tam Tam signed us.
HHFD. Start the panic.
Maybe the fact that we had such a light-hearted attitude about failure that day helped us to get over it and think of new ideas and bring Tony in. Maybe if we were more hurt and knocked back, we wouldn't have had that kind of optimistic attitude.
Total Confusion entered the UK single charts at position 56 in October 1990. As so often, success is not only a good thing.
We were young and full of energy and pride and ego. Ego and the artist are best friends, and this the most destructive element of any artist, I think, is the ego. You need some, but if you don't control it, it turns you into an absolute horror. What it was for me, I believed that people were looking at me as just the rapper, because the front of house look of Homeboy, Hippie A Funki Dredd is that you had Caspar on the keyboard, I was the rapper, and Tony was the DJ. The fact was, I was the guy behind the keyboard and the rapper, and Caspar was more of the sample guy, and Tony wasn't in there at all. So by the time it came out and all the press and everything seemed to be gearing towards Caspar, this studio genius, and the rapper's Marc, the rap was done as a place filler to get someone else to do a rap. They wrote about the tune Total Confusion, and all they wrote was Caspar Pound, this enigmatic studio genius, comes up with this song, and they completely ignored me. So I had an ego, a bit of a chip on my shoulder about it. I wanted the kind of respect that I thought I deserved for the work that I'd put in. And it led to me and Caspar having a massive bust up. And that was our lowest moment, and that's when we split. But we ended up just getting back together and doing Project One and all sorts of stuff after. So like blokes do, we had a pint of beer, shot the breeze for a little while, chatted about it and got over it, started making beats again. Enigmatic. I think that was the thing that got to me when I was younger. It's a word I'll use now, but I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. But I would now use that word. Ironically, I would pull that word right back out and say, they were correct. He was an enigmatic studio genius. Because I don't know how he managed to come up with them big tunes. I just don't know. He managed to do it. He was an enigmatic studio genius, yeah.
HHFD. Start the panic.
So Total Confusion was Total Confusion. I see you walk the streets in your dazzling vests. You're taking in the lyrics like you're smoking a cess. You're getting high, wondering why you can't fly. Ask me no questions and I will tell you no lie. Because your days crazy and amazed, so I'll rephrase. I can keep on going for days. Days will turn to years. You'll still be here. And if I get had the chance, I'll go top of your ears. Cause I get kicks for being slick, quick, not thick. You come over here, you're gonna get your ass kicked into a hearse. We're under a stone cold surface. And when I finish that, I hold a jam at your service. You're astounded. And you're walking around in circles. And it's a big miracle. How you still going, you're slow and your batteries running low when you try to pull me back, but of course I keep towing you on and on and on. But that's wrong. You should be concentrating on rapping your own songs, because rapping is an art. But there are many rappers, it takes talent. I've got plenty of that, plus the fact that I ain't blackjack. You come over here, you know that you're gonna get slapped back to where you come from. Could be the Bronx or London, I'll take you all on. Cause you choose to mess, and just for the roughest, Manchester in the house. Here's something to blow your mind to the atmosphere. Come on, feel the beats, cause you know it's here.
Total Confusion marks the initial starting point for the careers of Caspar and Marc. This track had no fall-to-the-floor beat, like many other tracks, and it wasn't like any other breakbeat tune either. In fact, nothing ever sounded like it before and since. It follows its own rules and stays unmatched until this day. It may even be burned into your musical memory, depending on how intensively you experienced the time back then. For Caspar and Marc, it was a door opener to further exciting experiences, new acquaintances, and possibilities.
After getting signed to Tam Tam, in order to get us moving, they got us to remix a track called A Moment in Time by a group called Fourth Money. Big piano house tune. Dun 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 dun. It's morning time. Tam Tam Records, their local studio was F2 Studios in Mount Pleasant in central London. And Pete Smith was the resident engineer. And we did our first couple of tunes with him, the remix. Pete is a savage.
I was working at the studio, and for the owner, I was helping him with his tracks because he was putting out tracks on his own. And in return, he was giving me studio time so that I could work on some tracks for myself. And he would put them out. Caspar was with Homeboy, Hippie A Funki Dredd, who just had a bit of a hit with Total Confusion. And they came in to do a follow-up track. Yeah, they seemed to be riding high. They were, lively bunch of lads. And we got on really well in the studio. Initially, it was a very fun time. It was a really buzzy little setup and people were coming by all the time and it really felt like something was taking off. There was a lot of energy. The studio was working. People were in there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, making music. It was a really sort of creative and energetic place to be. I mean, that's what everyone was into. That was mainly the people coming through the door at F2. And there was other engineers doing tracks there, producing and remixing and all sorts of stuff. So it was a hub of positive dance energy.
So that's how we really got to Pete, and I just learned so much from him because this was maybe my second time in a professional studio. The first one was writing Total Confusion, and the next one is remix this big dance tune. And I'm sitting with Peter, who's got all this experience, and Caspar pushed him, and I pushed him, and he didn't break. And that just told us this was the guy. And he just like, yo, give me more. That was Pete, give me more, let's go. So yeah, Pete's a G, absolute G. I met Plavka through Caspar.
Plavka was working with a Shamen and I was doing their session. And that's how I met her. I don't know how she hooked up with Caspar, but people were always sort of dropping by the studio. It was a bit of a sort of centre. There was always a few people hanging out and drinking coffee or tea or whatever and talking and playing each other bit of music. And so, you know, she was always on the scene.
I met him by chance. I was going to Mount Pleasant Studios, which is in King's Cross. And I was going there because I was going to be recording the song LSI for the Shamen, because that's the group I was in at the time. That's where I met Caspar. He was there because it turns out that's where he was always recording, always working. I know that like when I met him, I thought, wow, it's so cool to meet him. I didn't really know that much about Homeboy, Hippie A Funki Dredd, but he was telling me about it and he seemed like an incredibly cool person. And quite honestly, I think it was love at first sight.
It was like a clubhouse. We were all just down there mixing and melding.
You hear that about other places. It was just fortunate that it was there.
F2 Studios became a melting pot for people of all kinds of backgrounds and generations, which led to mutual inspirations. In retrospect, Marc sees similarities to his younger self from his perspective as a manager for today's young artists.
You got to put yourself in the time. It was a whole new movement. When I got to a certain age, a whole new set of kids came to me and I kind of saw them as my future, so I gripped onto them. And I think Pete saw that in us, in that we were these young kind of upstarts that have just come in with this brash new sound, you know, ballsy, put a delay on that, more reverb, more bass. That, you know, we were like dangerous. And I think Pete spotted that and just thought, these guys are like throwbacks. You know, it was very rock and roll what we were trying to do. And I think it sung to him. I never really dug into Pete's past because he was a very quiet guy, but he was a quiet storm.
I'm 10 years older. That's why it was kind of interesting for me, because they were having a sort of revolution and I'd had a revolution. I mean, I'd been a punk musician in the 70s. So I'd kind of, that idea of just making your own music and not working for big record labels and stuff had been around since then. And so when it came around again, basically with sort of hip hop and stuff coming from the States, I was re-energized and excited by that, as we'd been kind of bogged down again by big record labels and big pompous rock groups, and the whole sort of acid house and house music in general, just the warehouse nature of it was really exciting. I was still active and putting out tunes all through that. But I did have a sort of a distance because of the age difference. I don't know if that worked in any way to my advantage or their advantage or whatever, but I kind of like to think it might have made some difference. But I partied pretty hard, you know. I didn't let them get away with anything that I wouldn't do.
Caspar went into F2 and started his label from the studio. And I started joining him down in this studio, in the basement. It was a very cool spot, and we could just come in and out. It was just like our hangout spot, you know?
I just started running miles. I don't know. The road just seemed long. You know when you look at things like in perspective or whatever. Just going deep down the tunnel. Just like something just started taking over me. My heart started beating. I don't know. It sounds stupid. I haven't started making sense yet. But my heart started beating. Faster. So it's gonna pop out and then.
Caspar founded the label Rising High Records in early 1991 on the premises of F2 Studios, partnering with the studio owner Rob McLuhan. Initially, Caspar wanted to release his own music on white labels, just until he found another record deal. But that didn't work out as planned. The label was part of his master plan, but did not necessarily include the situation that he found himself in, all of a sudden running 3 record labels as a label manager in a full-time job. Rising High, Sappho, together with Pipey, the dancer of the Hypnotist, and Ascension.
He always had this Rising High umbrella thing that he wanted to do. And he wanted to do an umbrella company. I remember him telling me this straight away.
I think what was interesting to Caspar and what attracted him to become involved with me and Rob was that there was already a sort of a little business established, which the sort of the kernel of our little label, and just the mechanics of getting records pressed and getting labels made and distribution and things like that were already in place. Plus the studio had a good reputation as a sort of dance music studio in London, and further afield actually, people came down from all over the country to work there.
Let's go.
Caspar had a clear vision of what he wanted Rising High Records to become. He was observing very closely what R&S Records from Belgium and the UK's Warp Records were doing, and he wanted to establish Rising High as a high-quality label. Soon Rising High became one of the most important UK labels for dance music, and it was a well-respected player in the international scene. The quality of the releases spoke for themselves, dance floors were thankful, promotion was almost unnecessary. The label's reputation opened intercontinental doors, leading to licensing deals with the labels Underground Resistance from Detroit, R&S, and German labels Low Spirit and Hard House.
There was a lot of incredible labels putting out white labels and things like that, which was so exciting because it meant that, you know, somebody could put their ideas down, record it, and it would be pressed, and it would just be out so quickly. And that's what's really exciting because it was very kind of like of the moment, and it kept changing. And that's what's exciting. You know, rather it be like going with a big major label and it takes like 2 years for your music to come out. That's not the point of like what we were doing in the scene that we were in. It was all influenced by music coming out of Holland, Belgium, Germany. Frankfurt was the epicenter of techno at that time, and that was a big influence on Caspar.
The first release on Rising High Records was Rainbows in the Sky by the Hypnotist, a project he formed with Pete Smith. The track took off in Germany immediately, getting Caspar and Pete to spend much time in Frankfurt and Berlin. It took the UK about 6 months to discover this gem. The direction of Rising High was not really following any strict rules, but it did specialize more in rave, techno, ambient and chill-out music. When the releases were critically acclaimed, Caspar thought he would try and keep it just that way. But then again, He got excited about a new demo from Project One or Interface, which he felt from within were prime examples for the sound of Rising High, without a care about their commercial potential or performance.
Doing Project One with Caspar was a great experience for me because it was a sound that I believed in more so than the hardcore sound. It was my heritage that I could bring forth. So when I did I Love to Smoke Marijuana, the 3 or 4 Project One EPs I did were among his best performing stuff, and the West Indian experience in London is very powerful. So it just worked really well and helped me be a very integral part of what became drum and bass, which I still to this day am amazed and really proud to be part of that. And that was down to Caspar. Because we did Total Confusion together, he just gave me freedom to be who I wanted to be on Rising High, and he said, whatever you want to bring me, just bring me.
The essence of the tune was the important thing, and Caspar, we were sort of as one with that idea that if someone brought in a track, he'd release what they brought in. It wasn't a matter of sort of striving for perfection, it was just capture the spirit of the thing and then try and put that out.
Caspar once said in an interview that he got a lot of demo tapes, listened to them all, but signed almost none. Knowing himself how to make electronic dance music in various styles and being aware of the freedom of music production made it hard to convince him of the music he got sent. And because he liked a lot of different music and Rising High was not necessarily pinned to any genre, he knew when he had heard a potential Rising High record. This way, the label started and pushed the careers of chill-out maestro Irresistible Force a.k.a. Mixmaster Morris, Luke Vibert as Wagon Christ, Black Dog Productions and the later Plaid, among many others. But even though Caspar was confident that he was correctly filtering out the 75% that was deemed not good enough, one would certainly have taken a closer look at the demo material and evaluated the decision in a much more differentiated way if one had known beforehand how an artist would develop.
This happened to everyone. This is not exclusive to him. But it was one of those moments where I could see one of his frailties came out. And I'll never forget this one. Someone came in, it was a girl that worked for him in the studio with like an assistant, and she brought a demo tape and played it to him. And he kind of poo-pooed it because I think of the person who played it to him. He poo-pooed it like, yeah, no, we don't need that. Walked away. And it turned out to be, is it AFX Twin? Is that how you say his name? So we sat in and heard really early AFX Twin stuff. And he was just this kid from out in the country that she knew personally that was just doing these beats in his bedroom. And Caspar was like, nah, we don't need that. Because I think it was too close to what he was, being this kind of hardcore god. And I don't think he'd mind me calling him that actually. But yeah, we both sat down and I didn't tell him he was wrong, which is just kind of my own thing. But we turned it down, and that was a moment where I think we were both kind of we were both getting high off our own supply, feeling ourselves a lot in the studio, like, yeah, we're the guys. And yeah, to turn down AFX Twin, and then he turned up like, 6 months, a year later.
The high quality output going, from a business point of view, the label worked just like any other company. Some releases were successful and fortunately made enough money to cross-finance the label's activities. For example, The House Is Mine was Rising High's best-selling release at the time. It sold 50,000 copies. But making hit records was never Caspar's priority, because he thought that could kill a record label. And this attitude paved the way for the art and artists of Rising High, and possibly spawned some dreams about life-spanning careers in music.
that whole time when I was with Caspar, it was like a dream come true, because we had like this tribe, because obviously he created Rising High Records, and then he signed all these artists. So we were always surrounded by a bunch of similar people, and we were all in similar age. And so it was just incredible. I had like this gang of people to hang out with, and it was pretty damn cool. And then like he and I being able to like go off and do gigs all over, you know, well, and then also go to different recording studios and doing some TV shows. It was definitely a dream come true.
When it came to the Hypnotist, you would never know what happened next. So, if you took a sweet piece of this, something embracing like this, and a powerful positiveness like this,
and you thought the beat slowed down, come on!
With the Hypnotist, you most probably would end up here.
In the studio, you know, it was rocking. I wasn't interested in making a good studio sounding record. I wanted something that sounded good on the dance floor. You know, that was always the thing. I mean, obviously they could sit and chill to some of the tunes, but it was happening out on the street and in clubs. If the ingredients are in there, it'll work, you know. So sometimes I had to keep the young ones in line a bit, but they're having fun, so that's cool.
Hypnotist was definitely Caspar's rock stance. It had that rock posture, you know, the Hypnotist, like really hard. I remember he had some funny samples, hysterical, but you know, it was just like this really hard persona. The music was insane. It was like very masculine, very, yeah. Definitely entertaining, it was good.
And then me and Caspar, I guess it was probably because initially he needed someone to engineer his sessions. He wanted to do some tracks and things he was up for trying out. Just a sort of a meeting of minds and a good situation. I'm always looking for DJs to come along with boxes of records and bring me some breakbeats and bass lines and stuff like that. So it's a sort of mutual thing, really. DJs were, and still are, probably a sort of magnets. They'll find stuff. They'll spend hours going through a box of records in a second-hand shop just to hopefully find maybe one track that they can use. And I didn't have time for any of that stuff and wasn't particularly interested, but he was bringing that to me, the sort of DJ mentality, and I was probably bringing the technical side, plus I could program synthesizers and stuff like that. So it made a good team.
Maintaining a certain kind of contrast within a track was an essential and integral part of the creative process of the Hypnotist.
I think it's a matter of probably just a technical thing, really. When I was mixing tracks, I would be probably a bit more technically aware of using effects and stuff like that, whereas I think Caspar would go for a kind of drier, more sort of edgy kind of sound. I would say that was probably the main difference. In terms of what we liked to listen to and when we were working, we'd have it ear-splittingly loud and it would be rough as hell. That was the criteria. I mean, the speakers in our studios used to get replaced every couple of weeks because they wouldn't last. But it was about dynamism and getting some energy and sort of getting people nodding their head and tapping their feet and just making sure that it was sort of focused in that direction. And if everything is like really rock hard and blazing and there's no contrast, so I think the contrast between the sort of slightly smoother sound and a sort of tougher techno makes for a better track.
In the studio, it was all about capturing the moment and getting it straight, because having to record to tape didn't tolerate any messing about.
We had a saying, that we don't do demos, which was my approach for a long time, because I used to hear people would bring in demos when I was doing studio work and say, oh, we want to do this again in the big studio. And I'd listen to the demo and say, why do you want to do this again? This sounds great. Put this out. This is a really good, fantastic track. You do it again, you're looking to lose that something that you've got there. And people would say, oh no, we need, the record label wants it done in a big studio and all this production and stuff like that. Whereas the original idea was raw, exciting. There might be some things you could improve if you wanted to, but I've seen 10,000 people going crazy on the dance floor to something that was made on a Tascam 4-track with cassettes. Yeah, and especially with digital, because I come from an older tradition of using tape. Once you've recorded something, you've recorded it, and obviously you can patch it up and you can do a little bit of editing and things like that. But with digital, you've always got the constant ability to change everything at any time. So you really need to have discipline to know when something is going to be permanent and you're not going to go back and fiddle and mess about. At least with tape, you had a discipline to sort of get it down, get it as good as you can, and then move on to mixing. I've worked with lots of people that have started with very primitive, really primitive stuff. Bedroom techno and bedroom hip-hop, people had their Technics deck and just cutting records together and putting out white labels and stuff like that. And going back to sort of reggae traditions of people would make a tune and then they press it up on a dub plate and then take it to a dance, and if it dropped at the dance, then they knew they were on to something, and that is not really for people to go home and listen on their record players or their stereos. And I did like that DIY ethic. It's just not restricting yourself really by any kind of technical nonsense. People that notice in the dance floors, you see the dance floor filling up when the track goes on. They don't know if it's done on a 4-track or done on an 8-track or digital or analog or anything. Hardcore, the score. That was a great one to make. I remember we had some really good times in the studio putting that one together. It was just a phrase that you'd hear on pirate radio stations in London. People would be shouting that out, so we put that on a tune. It was the studio manager on another phone in the building shouting his head off. And we just sampled that, He's called Andy Higgins, by the way. That was the man doing the hardcore, the score. Shout out to Andy.
Even though the name Rising High Collective, or shortened RHC, had already been mentioned even on a Homeboy, a Hippie and a Funki Dredd's first release Total Confusion, RHC had only really formed after Caspar teamed up with the American singer Plavka.
When I met him, first of all, there was just this chemistry, and so it turns out it was shared chemistry, but it was coming from a place of admiration because we were on the same path. We were both 21. I had just moved there recently from LA. I kind of like escaped, never been in England, but I just knew I was so into the rave scene. And at the time, America didn't know anything about really cool underground dance music, unless if you went to Detroit or something. But I was very young. I was still living at home. So, but then Caspar, I was really impressed by him because he was already making records and I was doing it with the Shamen. So I just think it was a real meeting of the minds, and we were like kind of just into the same thing, very passionate about the scene.
And then Caspar comes in with this gorgeous siren of a lady with a sultry American accent. She was vampish, she was gorgeous. He said, like, Mark, we're writing music together.
RHC then was Plavka and Caspar as the core members, and anyone who had ideas to contribute was invited to join in.
It was very loose, really. I think they did lots of sessions with lots of different people, engineering and things like that. It was a kind of broad range of people doing different things.
And because we were just around all the time, it was something where you could be there and it's like, I'm doing something, do you want to jump in?
It was never Caspar's priority to make hit records, but he was itching when he started RHC with Plavka. In a way, they shared a vision of what a techno track could be.
We need to do the very first techno track with a real song. So not just gratuitous like ad-libs, because there was many techno tracks with just some ad-libs. But he said, we're gonna do a full song, meaning, verses, chorus. And so we thought we would do it with Marc Williams, because Marc Williams is a very good songwriter. So I remember the three of us were working at the studio, and of course Pete Smith, who's always the engineer, because Pete was incredible with all the sound and the EQing and what have you.
I was probably just doing the technical stuff, working the mixing desk and the sequencing and a bit of synth programming, stuff like that.
And then of course I sang it, and then I would say all the production was Caspar.
The kind of was something that I had kind of sketched in my head. There were words that I had already written, and then when she sung it, it felt like I wrote for her because she just made it sound dreamy.
Just means the world you see together in ecstasy. You send me up to the highest peak. I feel weak, but I still hold on. You send me up to a peak, 'cause your love is deep, so I must be strong.
I love it, yeah, to this day, and I think it sounds fresh. I think it's special because of what I was saying about what we set out to do with that track. It was very clear, and also it all worked. It had a really good melody, you could sing along to it, and it was cool, and it wasn't like cheesy. Yeah.
That song, I get goose pimples with that one. That's a tough tune. That song had teeth. It had gears, it had claws, soft, beautiful pads across that really hard, coarse beat. So you're surfing on this, and all of a sudden, the heavens open up, and like, it's a beautiful day. The same thing you did with Plavka. You had this, and you're kind of like, and this real kind of coarse thing, and then all of a sudden you're swimming under this beautiful siren, almost like a mermaid's cup. He was fearless, man. He was a fearless guy. He just knew how to make things rub.
It was just so much fun. Like when Hypnotist was booked to play at the Omen. It was just incredible because we were just doing music on our own in this scruffy little studio in King's Cross. And then we went to Frankfurt, and then all these people knew about the Hypnotists, and it was just so incredible. And we were still really young, and we had never been, we're not performers, you know, or anything like that, but we learned as we went. And then I got to do Fever Called Love. We kind of tossed that in too after the Hypnotist performance. That's how it led to us meeting Renat from RNS, because he was at the show, and then he signed us as RHC.
Just had this way of dousing you, soaking you in emotion, whether it was hardcore or ambience. He soaked you in it. He overplayed it. He wouldn't give you 90%. He'd give you 150%. It was just mad. It's just great stuff.
Fever Called Love was Caspar's favorite RHC track. That was the one that made his heart flatter. It reached position 65 in the UK single charts in January 1992. Caspar then had slight regrets that it was released on R&S instead of Rising High, but the R&S label boss Renat had talked him into that somehow.
Basically, we did Fever Called Love and it was an underground hit, but it didn't have commercial success. Now, one thing that me and Caspar could constantly do was underground, the streets, the clubs, we could really go at it, you know? But we never had commercial success, and we didn't mind that until RHC. RHC was when he really wanted to go up a level. And we did Fever Called Love, and I think it did well considering what we did. And that was enough to get Jam and Spoon to notice Plavka. Reach, the next song we did, I think we overplayed that one. We put a lot more money into that song.
One time we went to go do a TV show with Hypey. He was dancing for us, and we were going to perform a song called Reach. And we went to do The Hitman and Her. It was quite a big TV show at the time. It would come on late at night on the weekends. And the people that hosted it would go to different nightclubs and raves, and then they would like put it on TV. So the idea was like, if you were out with your friends, you come back from a club, you watch The Hitman and Her. And it was really fun. We did that show. We were like in some club or something. We didn't do a lot of TV shows. We were like a critically acclaimed kind of group. We weren't really top 40 or anything like that, but that was fun.
Reach for a hand to hold everybody. Times can get rough and cause a struggle, leaving you no escape. Pressure's rising, hope minimizing, leaving you little faith. But hang on and don't despair. There's someone who cares. Why don't you take on?
Jam and Spoon do a tune called Right in the Night. Wow, that tune went off. Whoo, that tune went off. We're watching this tune at #1 in the charts for bloody weeks. And I'm watching Caspar's spirit just get knocked and knocked and knocked because he wanted to be the guy that brought commercial success to Plavka. To show he could do that. We had a label, a studio, a team. He got a great songwriter in me and him, and we can produce this, we can make this hit, you know? And then she goes and does it with Jam and Spoon, and it kicks you know what, it kind of kicked my butt as well, if I'm being real, because, you know, we were a unit down there, and Plavka was our chance to smash it.
Togetherness is the key. Time for peace and harmony. There's no other way. Why don't you take a look around at the misery that does not need to be?
Pete Smith was an engineer, but I think with that kind of sound, he was really taking an instrumental part on it.
I got into arranging quite a bit. Personally, I think arranging's very underrated. I think 80% of the track is the arrangement, in my opinion. Making sure that things drop when they drop and stuff like that, and keeping them tight.
I was just a songwriter, so they got me into write song. I put the chords on Reach for Caspar, and I did a remix, but my main thing was writing Fever Called Love. That was the most I did for RNC, to be honest.
Reach, yeah. It was quite a long time working on it. I think it never quite reached its potential, but I liked it.
We did really well, but we didn't do Jam and Spoon, you know? And me and Caspar knew that if we really put our minds to it and we made the right moves, we could have done that. But we didn't want to. We didn't want to. We enjoyed where we were.
Plavka and Caspar continued producing and recording as Rising High Collective, among other names, keeping the concept of changing lineups.
I remember he started recording some songs for me just under my name, and he was releasing on them Rising High. Because I got more and more into I wanted to sing a proper song. Because I'm thinking that if you're in dance music, sometimes the vocalist is not important as a track, and they would put the track really loud and put the vocalist quieter, and I was like, wait a minute. Because I had more old-fashioned ideas, because I'm from California, United States. I was thinking a song and a singer is really important. So I was writing more songs, and I remember doing Feel the Fire, and I just listened to it the other day, and it's really good. And I was in that point, getting into trip hop too, Portishead and stuff, and it kind of has that sound, and I wanted to express myself in a more soulful singing. Fever Called Love was pretty soulful, it was cool, you know. Yeah, so now whenever I hear anything that we do, there's just a lot of love there, yeah.
That was RAC. Plavka was wonderful, genius. I think it really helped Caspar. It hurt at first, but it helped Caspar move on from the whole Total Confusion era and stuff, and it helped him move into the ambient and stuff like that. You know, it was a necessary step.
performances were always nice when someone did it, which in many cases was not possible in clubs back then. Also, a live performance was not necessarily better than the recorded studio version. In the end, nobody in the audience could tell the difference between what was played live and what was played back from tape anyway. So it didn't bother Caspar too much, or in his own words, he was not too snobbish about it. According to Pete, the Hypnotist's live appearances were
a bloody mess usually. It was me and Caspar and a guy called Pipey, who was our front guy. He was fantastic. He just got the crowd going. I was always a bit uncomfortable with doing a live thing with a playback, so I always tried to make sure that at least I had a synthesizer that was plugged in. If we were doing it to playback, then I could play something on top and give it something, make it so it wasn't just people listening to a tape. But I used to have a lot of fun. We didn't really have much time to work up a show, really. We were just doing sort of short promotional little things, but it was great to actually be in front of an audience and get some feedback. I mean, I think a lot of electronic music doesn't really experience that. Obviously, DJs do, the DJs are the heroes of today. You can sit in a studio and fiddle about with different hi-hat patterns and stuff like that for days and days, but you get it onto a dance floor and then you get that feedback. So, yeah, it was gratifying, but it was sequenced digital music. I just needed a keyboard to play that I could just throw in a few sounds and stuff like that. I come from a background of playing in bands, so there's no question of standing on a stage unless you're presenting something that you're actually doing. It feels a bit like a fraud, a bit not quite being honest.
The lineup at the May Day 1991 in Berlin was one of the highest quality the techno scene had to offer at the time. DJs Frank de Wolf, Westbam, Sven Feth, Tanith, and live acts Rave Signal, Speedy J, Mental Overdrive, and The Hypnotist. Berlin's legendary DJ Tanith, real name Thomas Andrezak, remembers the live performances that day.
It was a night where everybody that I saw on stage gave everything. It was totally different by what the artists were doing, but everyone gave everything, like sweating and putting everything in there. And you saw this in the hallway because I was up there in the VIP area, and we looked down and we had this mass going crazy to everything that was happening.
That's a good idea. Okay, let's go.
The output of Caspar's projects was critically acclaimed, but the perception of the productions and the music he was involved in of course varied at the time of release, depending from what perspective one looks at it.
I was completely shocked at what happened. I didn't know. just didn't know what we'd done. Caspar knew more than I did. He realised that we'd made something really big, because I think he'd been out a lot more in the clubs, he'd been in the game a lot more. I don't know, he spotted it before, I just couldn't spot it. He was just a G like that. The reaction of people to that song, Total Confusion, was mind-blowing for me, because they really all got it, and I still didn't. I didn't get what we did.
The first encounter was 1990 with Homeboy, Hippie A Funki Dredd. I played that at my first club night that I had for myself at the second UFO club called Cyberspace. And I was responsible for the harder or faster kind of techno, whereas others wanted to go more into the acid or house direction. I wanted to always have it like the fastest, the hardest, and it fitted perfectly.
The Prodigy, for example, were doing stuff which had a lot of crossover. It had, break beats, it had ragga. The ragga thing was big in Britain, sort of early drum and bass. So the hardcore stuff really didn't go. It wasn't really too popular, actually. We had a review once, which Caspar put on a t-shirt, and it was faceless techno bollocks. And so that's what one reviewer thought. I was not really aware of it being especially brutal. I mean, I'd spent some time in Germany at the Tresor and places like that, and I'd heard plenty of much, much tougher tunes. Our stuff sounded very, very soft after coming back from a few nights there. I think the influences in Britain was a lot more sort of crossover between different styles of music, and there was this element of humour. It was something which we kind of enjoyed in the studio, making stuff that was funny. Just the broadness of where you hear something that inspires you or makes you laugh, something you think is funny, because I think there's always room for a bit of that in music. There were certain DJs, I guess, that would play a harder set, but I think the mass appeal, or whatever the mass was at the time, was probably for a sort of more varied DJ set, whereas the stuff that I'd heard in Germany, there would just be sort of 8 hours of brutal, brutal slamming. It would be great, but in England or in Britain, a bit more mixed up, and I think that comes back. There was sort of a hip-hop bass, and there was a reggae bass, and there was just a little bit more variety in the sources that people were using to make their tracks. I forgot, that Belgian stuff that came out as well, I can't remember any of the tracks now. That was pretty tough. That was tough stuff.
I perceived it as epic. It was like hardcore symphonies for me, and that was different to other tracks like the Belgian stuff or acid stuff, where you heard it like a few times and you knew where you had to go in. It wasn't like normal tracks, but there was so much happening in the tracks that it was like you listen to it 10 times and you always hear a different layer in the tracks. It was even difficult to mix because you didn't know where to get in, where to go out. Rainbows in the Sky, for example. The best was to play the whole track through, because the track was telling a story in itself. You didn't want to interrupt.
The different cultures of the different European countries produce different styles of music, obviously, and I think there's a certain soul element that was kind of present in a lot of British electronic music, maybe. We loved going to Germany. We always wanted to keep coming back. Every place we went there was just brilliant. The German people were just so open and very inspiring in that way. Like the hardcore ravers in Germany would just be so hardcore. You would see them in sort of 5 or 6 different clubs in the space of 2 weeks. They'd just travel the whole country, and they seemed to be permanently partying. So we'd ask them, well, do you work or anything? They'd just look at you and laugh. No, we don't work, we ravers. In the UK, it was a different scene, really, not quite so hardcore.
Mainly in Germany, it's more like 4 to the floor, and in England, you had more like the breakbeats into that law. Breakbeats under or 4 to the floor. But I don't think it was so different. The difference came later on. At first, it was kind of mixed. I played at Universe 1992, and I played most of the stuff was for me hardcore, but it was the same stuff that they played there. And I was German, the first German there. And I didn't perceive it as so different. After Gabba, it became different, but it was like past 1993. But before it was like all mingling up, like the UK hardcore, German hardcore. If you call it hardcore, we called it hardcore, but it wasn't like a term, hardcore. But the English hardcore was, in the history, more like breakbeat oriented. And the German, or the continental, I would say, the continental hardcore was more like fall to the floor and getting faster and faster.
Whenever DJ Tanith needs a peak in his DJ set, he still plays a Hypnotist track.
He was a landmark in my sets. There was acts like Force Mass Motion to the same time, or Automation from UK, which were kind of also epic, but different. But Caspar always had like he was more full on. When I wanted to bring the set to like the highest peak or the weirdest peak, then I would play a Hypnotist track. This is my classic in my sets, Rainbows in the Sky. You could play it with Ace and Windows in the Sky because it was in the same kind of weirdness, like all mixed together. You think it doesn't fit together, but it worked well in this context. He made it fit. You can bring sets to like different peaks, like the fastest peak, the loudest peak, the craziest peak, or the weirdest peak. And Hypnotist Rainbows in the Sky was always like with this staccatos in there and the build-ups and everything. It was like, it worked for itself. You just let it go and have the crowd go mad.
First years, Caspar worked with plenty of people on numerous projects and created such a high output that one could easily wonder how all this could come about in the first place.
Me and Caspar had a broader thing. It was a good relationship, but it did great sometimes because we did rub each other. We worked in the same studios, we did different sessions, we programmed keyboards and used each other's, people used samples and sounds. There were some crossovers, but there were things that Caspar did that I learned from. He had no rules, and neither did I really. We were young upstarts. So, you know, when we sat around the studio with Pete, a lot of the stuff I knew, a lot of the stuff we were doing, he was kind of going, you guys, this doesn't really make sense. But he went with it and he pushed. Pete was an absolute savage. He would just push harder than anyone else.
What Marc said is interesting because we had a good relationship. One of the things about having a good relationship is you don't actually talk to each other about having a good relationship. It's something that just works, and we worked quite a lot together, just us two in different places, in little studios, sort of working on ideas and stuff like that.
Let it go. Hold it to the mental count of 4.
The one outstanding thing with Caspar was throughout every time we worked together was that nothing was off limits. Every style of music we would listen to, he'd bring in boxes and boxes of records, and he'd be playing, spinning tracks all night. We'd be listening to everything from country and western to ragga to hip hop. So it was just to have an open mind really, and to try everything you can. You never know what's going to spark your imagination to start a track or what will bring a track together if you're sort of trying to find a focus. I think as one of the people working at that time that he was, it was a very conscious effort to bring lots of different musical styles together.
First, for a while, like, he was really into like Shut Up and Dance and that whole 90s thing of drum and bass. It was called Jungle. He was very much into like the whole techno, the R&S, Joey Beltram, I remember. He had how he would set up his track.
One one thing with working with Caspar I found is that we were fluid, man. There was no sitting around and, maybe we should go in this direction. Even if it didn't make sense, he was someone who drove the idea right through. And we'll worry about what it looks like after when we look back at it. But let's finish this thing. So we never really got in a situation where we had to worry about anything or look back, change, go back. It was just go, go, go. This guy just drove it through and the results were amazing.
It was work. We had a lot of fun, but sometimes you spend a day and a night, you're in the studio for 24 hours and you don't come up with the track, but you try everything, you look for inspiration and sometimes it doesn't come, but it's all good experience and, you know, one day you get lucky, one day you don't.
He's very confident in the studio. He knew exactly the kind of sounds that he was after and what he would do. And because he just lived and breathed it. All the time when we would be chilling out, we were just always listening to music. It was just incredible. It was really fun. I think it was mainly his passion, you know, that was just a magnet. When anybody's like so excited about something, it's always fun to be around someone like that. He was really into dark sounds, as everybody knows that would listen to that early stuff of his. The more scarier, the better. Very, very hard. Like Total Confusion, you know, that song was like really, really a lot of noise, but it was also full of energy.
It's he who dares wins. And Caspar was one of the most daring people I've met musically. Although in quiet, he was the most insecure about his music than anyone I've ever met. He knew his limitations. He knew that when sitting around me, Marc, you're a greater musician, say. But I was in awe of his daring and bravery, and he was fearless in the studio. But when he was playing you back the tune, you could see his shoulders hunch over and you would do that sniggering thing and you'd look at him and he'd not be so confident and sure.
It was just accepting that you need to dig deep sometimes just to find a good idea. It's not going to work every day, but when it does, it's fantastic. You know, we sort of kept each other going, and when you come up with a real cracking little tune or whatever, then it pays its own reward, really. You have to really look at it as a learning process. You develop, you learn from your mistakes and stuff like that. But I mean, going back to one of those things about the sort of humorous moments is where, I mean, we made lots of mistakes which we would think were terrible, but no one else noticed. So that's how it goes, really. But you just try and do better next time, you know, and keep moving forward. Again, it's that thing of no rules. If it fits in the track, then it goes on the track. People say, oh, you can't use that, it's not hip, or it's whatever. It's like that. There's no rules like that. If it works, it works. And especially if you play on a dance floor and it works, then that's all you need to know.
Very strange, because I didn't feel that Caspar was a kind of deep musician, nerdy jazz type who wanted to just make melodies and, you know, I mean, he did it, man. I guess that's what genius is, you know, you make those moves and you know that with limited skills you can do amazing things. He always had a crafty look on his eyes, like he was about to get one over on I think he was about to make some kind of name for himself, because there was always this kind of, we're going to get one over on him on this one. There was always something like that with him.
If you were not going to think about him and his music, I would say that if you just met him like somewhere, he comes across as shy, a bit introverted till you meet him, till you get to know him. But he's very bright, he's very capable, he was very ambitious, you know, he was really goofy and a lot of fun. But he was very, very driven because, you know, someone at 21 already hustling, he already had that song Total Confusion out. You know, he was a hustler.
And because Caspar was vivid in his genre, in the game, delivering results, a lot of attention was given to him.
That's always something that seems to happen with any sort of musical group or duo or whatever. Someone takes the spotlight, and I was perfectly happy with that. That was fine. After Rising High started, there was quite a lot of interest in the label, and as Caspar was the head of the label, he seemed to attract a lot of that attention. So interviews and stuff like that would come his way as part of the Hypnotist, but also he'd be interviewed as the label boss, and he'd be up for promoting the label and new acts and things like that. So it's understandable that he would take that role, and he did it brilliantly. Charismatic. He drew people to him. You know, he was always amenable to journalists and people from music magazines and stuff. Yeah, he was a very charismatic guy. He was very charming. He could hold people's attention, so that's just the way it worked, really. I mean, I could say I felt a slight resentment, but, you know, looking back on it now, I can see precisely why that was the case, and yeah, I don't have any problem with that at all.
At a certain point in time, it appeared like a necessary step for Rising High to move away from the F2 premises and set up somewhere new and independently.
Concerned the split between Rising High, where it started, and the management company that persuaded Caspar to sort of go and set up on his own. To me, that was a difficult time because I had sort of friendships with both the owner of the studio where Rising High took off, obviously with Caspar. It was a bit difficult, well, very difficult for a while. So it was a sort of torn loyalty, and I didn't like that. And I don't think Caspar liked it either, really. But it was a decision which was sort of made for him, on behalf of him. I don't know if it worked out too well. These things happened. It was that sort of big bust up there, which was unfortunate. Yeah, it left a kind of bad taste in my mouth. We've never had any disagreements about music or promotion or anything like that, really. We had a lot of fun. You know, and those times, yeah, they were very special.
Caspar, from the beginning, I realised that much more was possible than I thought. I was a very limited West Indian kid who grew up in church. I realised that I had some talent in music and I could write melodies all day long. Caspar showed me there was a whole world out there that I didn't understand, I didn't know. I was fascinated with kind of deep house, and Caspar came in and just the way he approached everything, it's just everything was possible. One of my tunes, Roughneck, a heavy remix. I didn't like it, but when it hit the clubs, everybody liked it. Everyone went nuts when it went to the clubs, and I had to literally reframe my own thinking because of how he approached the music. Made me a lot more daring. It made me a lot more adventurous. It made me understand that being safe is cool, but you won't stand out for it. You won't get plaudits for being safe. That was so edgy, he was so out there that he made everything else safe. It's not hard to sell a track that says I love to smoke marijuana in it. That was low-hanging fruit for him. What was hard to do was that Rainbows track that he did. Rainbows in the Sky, just a genius track. The sound that he used for that was a sound that I made on an Oscar keyboard. And we had a big bust up over that as well, because I made that sound and was doing a track on my album, and he did that track and used the same sound. And I think I was just annoyed that he used it better. But he gave me that crafty smile again when I called him out on it. Yeah, don't worry, I've got one over on you. And it's just a bloody genius, wasn't it?
Caspar saw techno music as a release of tension that would help people getting all their emotions out on music, instead of beating themselves up on the streets or exhausting themselves at the psychiatrist. And so his work, his influence and his motivation have left lasting traces until today.
I think he wanted to make an impact. I'm starting to see a lot more movement, old school movement. I don't know if it's the 30-year anniversary of hardcore. I don't know what it is, but I do feel a lot of that era now. When Carl Cox ended Space, he played Total Confusion as one of his last 10 tracks. it was that moment that started a slow, very slow re-triggering for me of where we'd been. So I must admit, I have been on YouTube a bit and done some listening back. You know, the single tear rolls down the eye as I remember my youth. And what a fucking good start we had.
It's the same reaction as to the time where they came out. They go mental. It's a weird thing with like the tracks from the beginning of techno. It's like the blueprints of techno till up to date. And so the strange thing is that the old stuff still works like they worked before. A lot of them. A lot of them don't pass the test of time, of course, but the ones that pass the test of time have the same reaction nowadays as they had in the beginning when they first came out, which is strange to look at, but it's great. It's like you see the foundation of what became the blueprint of techno is in the nucleus, which is going mad, mental and everything, and Caspar lived that. And you hear it in the music, and I think if you're living that and can put this into a track, it always works like it's a capsule which you can always open and you have the same reaction of that.
The kids that I hang out with now are so impressed by Total Confusion. Just the reaction, I don't know why, but I've kind of got a bit nostalgic and started looking back a little bit. And when I listen to that song and I'm reading the comments underneath on some of these people who post on YouTube, and I knew they loved it, but how it affected people's lives and psyche is incredible. I mean, I didn't know, I just didn't understand, and now I listen to it, and it does make me chuckle, because I'm like, I kind of get it now. It's taken me 30 years, but I kind of started to understand what people have got in the song.
I think what Caspar and his sort of generation brought into the scene was a sort of acceptance and embracing of all of those different aspects of hip-hop, reggae, electronics, as is being seen now in the grime scenes and the music of today. It's very sort of eclectic, and that sort of idea of melding all those different styles was one of the things that Caspar and his sort of generation were responsible for. It's more common now, but it was less common there, and there were people who would be purists and say, well, you can't use that and you shouldn't use this. The drum and bass guys, they were pretty purist. They wanted to have these rules again, which I thought was really weird. Thankfully, it's all moved on from then again, so it's an open book now, you know, again.
Well, I remember one time I was listening to Represent Radio, which I listen to a lot. It's a London underground station, but it's a big station. But I heard a track somebody made, and then it had one of those sounds from Total Confusion, where it's like those voices that kind of sound like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It had that. And I was like, oh my God, that's from Total Confusion. You know, they were at the beginning of that whole explosion of rave, and I think that influenced a lot of people. Even the older generations that never heard that, they heard someone that was influenced by that, and it kind of like carries on.
That's very interesting, because like when you look at the late 90s and the 2000s, I would say he had no impact, because techno changed to another side. But if you hear the techno which is coming up now from the younger generation, which is again more up like 140 beats per minute and faster, this a lot reminds me of what Caspar did at the beginning of the 90s. I think there's a change of techno where you can't make really money with it. So you can go wild with what you want. And I think it's got more distinctively like tech house or house, which is more like 120 BPM or 125 BPM. And techno is going back to its roots where it was faster, like 140, which is my favorite BPM. And I think nowadays, these kids are like 24 to 27. I don't know if they heard about Hypnotist, but I hear a lot of Hypnotists in their tracks. Like they know the history of techno. Probably they have all these YouTube documentations, read about it like in Klang der Familie, listen to the music and got probably inspiration by the older tracks, and I hear definitely Caspar Pound in there. I play regularly, when you can play nowadays, at Technocid, which is like a classic event where I play almost any Hypnotist track. I think because I try to change it from Technocid to Technocid because I don't want to repeat myself. And so I always have to look out what I haven't played yet or what is left and what will fit this time. And I think I played every Hypnotist track at least once.
The work of Caspar Pound still reverberates strong inside those people who had either collaborated with him, played his music, or were eternally affected by unforgettable dance floor and club experiences.
Hi there, my name is Michael Wells from G.T.O. Talking here about Caspar Pound. For me, his outstanding feature was the infectious laugh. He was a tall guy, and seeing him laughing and giggling, to me was the signature of Caspar. We recorded as Signs of Chaos and Church of Ecstasy with Rising High Records, and also made a G.T.O remix of Caspar's track, House Is Mine. I remember we were invited to Sven Väth's party, a birthday party in Frankfurt, where me, Lee, Caspar and Plavka, I think we were supposed to write a piece for DJ magazine. But after hitting every club in Frankfurt, we missed all the celebrations and simply had a great time with that ubiquitous laugh of his. The music of Rising High was a reflection of those times, and everything from trance, techno, jungle, chill out. Rising High, this was all a reflection of Caspar Pound's musical taste, which was wide-ranging and eclectic. I remember when we first played him Church of Ecstasy, his face was blank, and after hearing it, then suddenly his smile appeared, and he exploded into his famous giggle. That was Caspar.
You fill me full.
Hi, it's Kittin, and I'm very honored to say a few words about Caspar Pound because he was one of the first guy I bought music from. All his Rising High projects like the Hypnotist and Total Confusion and the Homeboy, Hippie A Funki Dredd was always a big foundation for my duty as a DJ to federate and spread what is raving and being united in a party and forget about time, especially today when we are all locked down and we desperately need this feeling back, and his music represents that need and that love and that get together, a magical culture that is rave and techno. So rest in peace, Caspar. Thanks a lot for the gems that are still so modern and relevant today.
Hi, it's Jerome Hill here from Super Rhythm Tracks and Don't Recordings. just paying like a mini respect to Caspar Pound, RIP, whose influence here in the UK and beyond was absolutely huge, really. Personal favourite moment from his catalogue would be Homeboy, Hippie A Funki Dredd, Total Confusion, but also his work as the Hypnotist, Rainbows in the Sky, Night of the Living E-Heads, then the huge record that was House Is Mine with Pioneers of the Warp Groove on the B-side. Yeah, the guy's done such a lot for the music. There's a lot of cross-pollination going on between different labels and rising high, had its fingers in all sorts of pies, not to mention the harder kind of Sappho record stuff that came a bit later. But yeah, big up Caspar Pound.
Hi, this is Michael. From the many aliases, I remember Caspar Pound as being the Hypnotist foremost. Hardcore, you know the score, when it came out, was completely new to anything we'd heard before. Yet it sounded familiar, as it had all the EBM sounds, the Belgian sounds in it that we grew up with, that came after New Beat. That also included the UK breakbeat, which we were very much into at the time. Hardcore, you know the score, was an absolute banger to us and made us move like crazy and shout and jump for joy. The Ride was one of the tracks that was harder, that was more brutal, that was more getting into our brains and into our blood. Whereas Pipey's Magic Journey just kept just jacking like crazy on the dance floor because it had so much energy, so much power. Unforgettable.
Hi, this is Gerd Jansson. My first encounter with Caspar Pound's music was probably through his Homeboy, Hippie A Funki Dredd project around 1990. I think I've told this story many times without really knowing that Caspar was part of that project, but I looked up his discography again and found out that he's basically responsible for inspiring me to get into the techno rave scene. The Total Confusion track was part of a HR3 Club Nights When Fate show or mixtape, and I think I was kind of attracted to the weird mixture of hip-hop, rave signals, techno music, house, like this early 90s melange. Without actually knowing anything about it, it was my first encounter with techno or electronic dance music or DJ culture as such, in that way. But yeah, it kind of sounded like the future back then, and it still does. I mean, Caspar's music or the projects he was involved in and the Rising High label, they're pretty wide and broad. But compared to other people, I think he was never one to really look for the limelight. So he was this classic behind-the-scene figure or in the second row somewhere, but nonetheless important for the whole thing or the development of the scene. I think he was definitely one of the influential people doing it from the very early stage on. The other Caspar Pound track that was hugely influential for me, again without kind of knowing that he was behind it, was The Hypnotist, This Is My House. I think that was, one of the first things I also bought. Back then it was still a so-called maxi CD instead of the 12-inch record. But at that time, in 91, I think only my parents had a record player, but I wanted to listen to stuff in my room, so it had to be on CD, and I bought the CD of that, Again, it's kind of an interesting or weird combination of an A and a B part. You have this super happy piano thing, which is something I still like to play and use to this day. Pianos all over. And then the B part of the dark rave side of it. Two sides of the same coin, which I think basically also is the foundation of any good nightclub or rave. You have the happy times and the dark times, and you mix them both together, and then you have the good times. Thanks for having me.
He got really busy with the label, and probably it was sort of a labour of love for him to do the label. I don't think it was run particularly well from a business point of view. But, I mean, it was what the guy was about. He was about exposing new music to as wide an audience as possible.
Rising High Records is today run by Caspar's daughter Sappho, who carries on the label's activities with new releases since 2015. Focusing mainly on remixes and re-releases of the catalog, there are chances that unreleased material may see the light of day. According to Pete, there could be loads of recordings on master tapes from sessions involving Caspar's countless projects and outfits. After the Hypnotist, Peter James Smith started a new outfit called MLO, together with John Ty of Low Recordings. They released music on Rising High, R&S and several other labels. Peter stayed active in producing music, and he found himself moving back towards playing more guitar lately, his initial instrument. He still has a studio at home with a sort of up-to-date setup, which he uses fairly infrequently, maybe because he is
retired, I guess you'd call me. Semi-retired, but I've always have been semi-retired, but I'm now actually semi-retired more.
Marc Williams has made a career in the music business. After founding his own label Thumpin' Vinyl, producing a lot of dance music and becoming an integral part of the drum and bass scene, he turned to producing library music in the early millennium. At the same time, he started working with young uprising artists, changed to management, and now supports them in developing their careers. He runs a studio complex in London and enjoys working with new generations of talents. Plavka continued working with Caspar throughout the years. Equally, she developed her cooperation with Jam & Spoon, with whom she celebrated further chart successes. Today she resides back in LA, where she is currently writing and recording acoustic music, which is to be released on an EP in the near future.
Yeah, I got some last words.
The spirit of Caspar still lives on in his music and the people he has worked with, even until today. His presence sparked inspiration, encouragement, realization and gratitude.
It's really strange because with Total Confusion, I've spent a lot of my life running away from it because when we started, I was more like a Guy Called Gerald type producer, house, like deep house and stuff like that. And how me and Caspar just met and accidentally made this absolute, I really am grateful that I met him. He turned up and asked me to go to a studio, and he wasn't doing it out of the kindness of his heart. He was doing it because he needed someone to make beats with him, because he understood his limitations. And he wanted someone that could play the keyboard and put a melody together and stuff like that, because that wasn't his thing. He was a producer in the true sense of the word, you know? He knew how to put the bits together. The thing I would say to him is just thank you, because I don't think I'd be who I am today without meeting this really confident white guy that got me in the game. I was suffering from my art, and 30 years later, my daughter goes to a great school and I have a pension, and 10 years from now I'll retire and me and my wife will spend time traveling, touch wood, enjoying my life, and a great percentage of that is down to meeting Caspar Pound.
I was really lucky to have like 2 bites of the cherry, to have a sort of punk thing and the homemade, and you know, it was a sort of teenage rebellion thing. And then later on, when the whole house started, you know, that sort of movement was really another inspiring little episode. It's nice to know that people appreciate what I did, and especially what Caspar did. He'd be still doing music and probably producing and running a record label. I'm sure he'd be a success, enjoying life and inspiring other people. I'd hope to be a friend, and I hope to see him, and if it was possible that we could do some music, then that would be fantastic also.
If he was here today, I would say, I'm so glad that you were wrong and you are living past the age of 30, because he actually said that to me once. He said, oh yeah, I'm not going to live past 30. He says, I'm going to be like Jim Morrison, but he said that. I think he just thought, he had a romantic notion about himself, I guess. I suppose like what I went through and what Caspar went through, it's a testament to others, especially young people who have dreams about wanting to be in music. My background is I don't have people like friends or family in the music industry, and Caspar didn't either. And I think that if there's something you really want to do and you're desperate to do it, you can make it happen. And that's like something that I lived through and I have found for myself. Something like that, it just gives you immense confidence going through your life, knowing that you can do that. I remember the first time that I heard my voice on the radio was when I sang Hyper Real with the Shamen. I was like, oh my God, I know how the world works now. I had an epiphany. What it said to me is I'm not a perfect singer. I'm not the best singer. I'm none of those things. But what it means is that if you have hustle and if you have a desire, you can make things happen.
I met him again like in 2002 or 2003, where I had him back in Berlin at a Back to Basic, which is also a classic event. And he was playing there live. He was so into the stuff that he fell over. It was gone. The music was still playing, and saw his finger coming up and doing so, but he was behind the stage, falling around there somewhere. And people had to bring him back up so he could go on. It was a late but perfect metaphor for him, I think, because every time I met him, it was like totally over the top. Not by drugs or anything, but he was always like these typical studio nerds that have a different reality. They pick all the loose ends like with the modular and put everything together, and you wonder what comes out at the end as a normal person. And that was Caspar Pound. He still worked it. Crazy.
Hypnotizing. Remembering Caspar Pound. A feature by Roger van Lunteren. With Marc Williams, Peter James Smith, Plavka Coleridge, Thomas Andrezak, and Michael Wells, Caroline Hervé, Gert Jansson, Jerome Hill, Michael George. Special thanks, Marcus Arnold for cross-reading and review, Colin Favor for his 1992 interview with Caspar Pound. Schallobst edition 45 on 674 FM 2020. Thank you, Caspar Pound, for all these crazy moments and cozy memories. It has been an honor to have walked the earth at the same time you did. We are all still hypnotized by your music, you hippie, you dark star, you rainbow in the sky.
See ya.